I'd like to take this opportunity to call our meeting to order, the meeting of the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality Secretary's Environmental and Justice and Equity listening session of Tuesday, October 12th, 2021. Thank all of you for being here this evening. Let me begin by reading the ethics statement to all of you. In accordance with the State Government Ethics Act, it is the duty of every board member to avoid both conflicts of interest and the appearances of conflict. If any board member has any known conflict of interest or is aware of facts that might create the appearance of such conflict with respect to any matters coming before the board this evening, please identify the conflict or the facts that might create the appearance of a conflict to ensure that any inappropriate participation in that matter may be avoided. If at any time any new matter raises a conflict during the meeting, please be sure to identify it at that time. Let me take the opportunity to remind everyone that our session is being recorded this evening, and let me ask you to respectfully maintain your audio on mute unless you are speaking, so that we all have the benefit of hearing our guest speakers this evening and being cognizant of the time that people have devoted to giving public input this evening. We're grateful for all of that. Now I will turn to Ms. Kramer and ask her to call the roll.
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Jeff Anstead. William Barber III.
Present.
Veronica Carter.
Here.
Jamie Cole.
Present.
Randy Haven O'Donnell. Jim Johnson.
Present.
Marion Johnson Thompson.
Present.
Carolina Fonseca Jimenez.
Present.
Deepak Kumar.
Present.
Danelle Lobdell. Marilyn Marsh Robinson.
Present.
Naima Muhammad.
Present.
Rodney Sadler Jr. Carlos Velasquez. Elke Whale. Sherry White Williamson.
Present.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson. That is all.
Thank you.
Excuse me, Chairman Johnson, this is Marilyn.
Mm-hmm.
It looks like Elke and Jeff may be in the attendees.
Okay.
I'll work on getting them over to be panelists. Thank you, Marilyn.
Sure.
Thank you. Let's wait a couple of seconds and see, can we get them in? We want the benefit of the entire advisory committee to hear presentations this evening.
Elke, are you able to speak?
Yes, I'm here. Thank you so much. Present. I
Great.
apologize.
And I saw Jeff. Hold on one second. I saw his name also.
Terrific. Welcome, Elke.
Jeff, are you also able to speak?
I'm able to speak. Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. Good
Terrific.
day, everyone.
Jeff, how are you?
Good, sir. Good. Good to see
Terrific.
you.
Hey,
Same
Jeff.
here.
Hello, hello.
I will modify the record to show that they were both present instead of absent.
Terrific.
And then I think that's all, unless anyone else sees anyone that I have missed.
Okay. Terrific. It is now my pleasure to turn this listening session over to two of our fellow board members, Ms. Sherry White Williamson and Ms. Naima Muhammad, to facilitate the presentations and the following board discussion. Ms. White Williamson and Ms. Muhammad, the floor is yours. Thank you for taking the responsibility for this listening session this evening.
Well, thank y'all for agreeing to have it. And Sherry is going to take it from here.
Thank you, Chair Johnson. It's a pleasure to have the opportunity to share with the board more information about the issue of CAFOs and digesters. So tonight, Naeem and I have worked closely with several experts to have them provide additional information to you all. I will not take the time to go through full resumes because they were sent out to the board. I will just give each person's name and title and let them go forward in the interest of time. And I'll present them all and they can present in the order that I present their names. Our first presenter is Reich Longest, who is the co-director of the clinical and experiential program at Duke Law School. Reich will cover legal issues for us tonight. Our second presenter is Dr. John Klassen, who is an associate professor and director of graduate programs in biological and agricultural engineering at NC State University, and he will be our second presenter. Our third presenter is Kemp Burdett. Kemp is the Cape Fear River Keeper and has worked in that position for a number of years now. He works out of Wilmington, North Carolina. And Kemp will talk about the water impacts. And the final presenter will be Dr. Sakobi Wilson, who will probably be a little late tonight. He has several conflicts and will join us shortly. But Dr. Wilson is associate professor with the Maryland Institute for Applied Environmental Health and Department of Epidemiology and Biostatistics at the University of Maryland College Park. And he also directs the Community Engagement, Environmental Justice, and Health Laboratory there. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Reich Longest.
Thank you so much, Sherry. Thank you to the chair and to the distinguished members here and to the director and the division. Thank you for this opportunity this evening. I did send out a slide presentation. Sherry, I wasn't sure if that was something that Renee was going to advance or if it was something where I needed to share a screen.
I believe Renee was going to take care of having it uploaded. Is that correct, Renee?
Yes, we will share the screen shortly in 1 second.
Thank you. While we're doing that, I'll just quickly tell you what I can't cover in 10 minutes. One of the things I can't cover is the history of the Clean Water Act, the various and sundry litigation components related to EPA's regulation of concentrated animal feeding operations, and also the detailed intersection that we call in law school cooperative federalism between the role of the federal government in providing minimum standards under the Clean Water Act and the state government in providing supplementary and additional protections and implementation of that. Can't cover all that in 10 minutes. So instead, I'm really going to try and focus on North Carolina specific issues. This first slide is just to try and orient us to realizing that today is going to be an applied discussion. We're really going to focus on the specifics of the lagoon and spray field system that we find today. This is a Google Earth shot of one of the farms that is being permitted to collect, add a new digester, collect and create biogas to be put onto a pipeline and shipped up to the Grady Road facility. This is the aerial photo of the lagoon and spray field and housing situation at that farm as we see today. You'll notice the color of the lagoon. It's purplish. That's not the color of animal waste. It's animal waste mixed together with a bacteria. I'm sure Dr. Clausen is going to talk to you more about some of the issues related to that. On the right is just the cover of the Title VI legal manual. This is the official guidance of the United States Department of Justice Civil Rights Division on implementation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964. This is the newest version from 2021, which I'll be referring to today. Thank you, Renee, for pulling up these slides. And if you could advance to the next slide, please. And the text. Yes, thank you. So the first text is that prior to 1996, believe it or not, I was working on these issues for the state back then. Back in 1993, I went to work for the state of North Carolina working on swine waste issues. And between 1993 and 1996, there was a lot of activity. And in 1995, there was a tremendous amount of interest in swine waste lagoon and spray field systems due to the structural failure of a number of lagoons and significant concerns about the rapid growth of the technology throughout Eastern North Carolina. In 1995 was the Ocean View Farms lagoon spill, 25 million gallons. That probably was the most well known of those spills, but there were a number of others, a number of which on which I worked as an assistant attorney general and later special deputy attorney general in terms of enforcement actions. In 1996, the North Carolina General Assembly moved us away from the deemed permitted status, which was the regulatory classification for these systems. You didn't have a physical permit. If you met certain qualifications, you were, in the words of the regulations, deemed to be permitted. In 1996, the North Carolina General Assembly enacted legislation that created the permit system and also placed a moratorium on new swine farms using lagoon and spray field systems, and put in there an exception, a date, a delayed effective date, and an exception. The exception defined a set of technology standards that were designed to be better than lagoons. So this was substantially eliminate the emissions of ammonia, substantially eliminate pathogens, and also control the issues related to metals and discharges and odors. These were all things that were supposed to be taken care of in the new technologies. Next, click one more. That led us to 2000. In that time period, while I was working with the Attorney General's office, we negotiated in 1999 agreements with Smithfield Foods, and then later in 2000, Premium Standard Farms and a group of farmers themselves called Frontline Farmers. Those agreements collectively could be referred to as the producer agreements, but in all practicality, we all refer to them together as the Smithfield Agreement. And that's how it's colloquially known. In that agreement, money was put aside by Premium Standard Farms and by Smithfield to develop technologies that were candidates that were selected by a designee. That designee was a faculty member of NC State University, Dr. Mike Williams. And as a result of that, in 26, after 6 years of study, Dr. Williams did designate a series of technologies as environmentally superior technology, one unconditionally, that was referred to as the super soils technology, and that was for the category of new farms. Next one, Renee. 2007, so the next year, the North Carolina General Assembly went in and made permanent the lagoon standards that we have today that grandfathered existing lagoon and spray field systems and the permits under which they operated as long as they made no significant changes. And then there was an exception again for this, this language which became permanent, so it was no longer a temporary moratorium. And they also founded a lagoon conversion program. So monies were put aside from taxpayers to pay to convert to these new technologies. Next bit. In 2019, the Farm Bill and the Budget Bill began to promote some of the animal waste biogas projects, and we ended up with a change from the language that we had in permits in the 2020 legislation, so that it was linked to the size of the animal population, not to the physical characteristics of the system itself. Prior to that time, the moratorium applied to animal waste management systems, and there was also a restriction on animals as a number. After this change, it was only linked to the number. That codified into law a prior interpretation that had been done by a Division of Water Resources former Division of Water Resources employee, Keith Larrick. Flip now, I think this is the next slide. So hopefully my rest of my slides will not be as text-heavy. So I've just given you basically 20 years worth of history of the legal developments in just a few minutes. Now we're going to talk about the civil rights laws and how they relate. So the this is right out of the Title VI DOJ legal manual. So this is a condensation of, and in that manual you will find the legal reasoning by the U.S. Department of Justice of why they think this is the test, and it's based on their analysis of federal cases involving the Civil Rights Act. Not all in the environmental context, in the larger context of Title VI civil rights law. And that is that there are really three things that we're looking for when we're trying to decide whether or not something can be a violation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act. One, is there a disparate impact? Does the adverse effect of the policy or practice fall disproportionately on a race, color, or national origin group? Two, if so, does the record establish a substantial legitimate justification for the policy or practice? Three, less discriminatory alternative. Is there an alternative that would achieve the same legitimate objective, but with less of a discriminatory effect? Now, I'm raising this issue for you now so you understand how that might apply to the issue of the permitting decisions and other decisions related to regulation of CAFOs that we're going to talk about next. Flip to the next slide, please, Renee. There is also a set of practice tips that are contained within this manual. It's quite lengthy, but it is available for download for free from the U.S. Department of Justice Office of Civil Rights. One of the things I think is important to note here is that the agency practice tip points out that while it does not, that disparate impact regulations do not define discriminatory effects, but simply state that recipients may not utilize criteria or methods of administration which have the effect of subjecting individuals to discrimination because of their race, color, or national origin. So if you are an agency that's receiving federal funds, you are forbidden from utilizing criteria or methods of administration which have the effect of subjecting individuals to discrimination. So it doesn't have to be intentional. If it has the effect of doing that, then that is prohibited. So then when there's the agency practice tip, will establishing adversity in most cases presents a low bar, meaning it's usually not that hard to show. Investigating agencies nevertheless should employ a broad definition of adversity, harm, and gather any and all evidence of adversity, harm, or risk of adversity, harm. That's what we're going to talk about next. Next slide, please. So where has the research gone in the 20 plus years that I've been working on these issues with regard to disparate impact and adversity? The disparate impact had been something that had been established in various publications put out by the late Dr. Steve Wing of the UNC School of Public Health dating back into the 1990s. Most recently, the North Carolina EJ report, the Environmental Justice Report that was done on the Align RNG LLC proposal, the biogas proposal that was recently considered back in, I guess it was up to public meeting was in November of last year, and then has been considered and been permitted this year. In that, there's the EJ report. I got the excerpt from that showing that we do see location now, so that we know that there is a correlation, not necessarily disparate impact, but a correlation of race and ethnicity as it relates to the location of some of these facilities, and that's documented in this Environmental Justice Report and Dr. Steve Wing's research. The North Carolina Medical Journal published a special issue a couple of years ago and had a symposium looking at the disparate health impacts and outcomes that were also correlated strongly to location. So correlation is not causation. We'll say that very clearly. Correlation is not causation. But remember, you don't have to prove causation to prove disparate impact, as the U.S. Department of Justice has indicated. Go to the next slide, please, Renee. That leads me to the history of environmental justice complaints as it relates to the ways in which North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality has regulated the activities of these swine CAFO facilities. The 2014 complaint did not arise in the biogas context. It did arise in the lagoon and spray field context. It led to a letter of concern issued by the US EPA in January of 2017, ultimately a settlement among all parties in 2018, and then DEQ implemented a new process for the implementation of general permits and terms. There was an update and a report by NCDEQ that was placed on their Title VI webpage in, I believe, around May of 2020. And there had been a challenge to filed by the North Carolina Farm Bureau to the general permit terms and enhancements that was filed in the Office of Administrative Hearings, and I believe may still be on appeal as of our discussion today. But in any event, that general permit issue was implemented, but then it was challenged by Farm Bureau, which is also the employer for Keith Lyric today. If you'll flip to the next slide, please. So in November 2016 of 2020, the public meeting was held in which, in a very really thing that I think they should be congratulated for, DEQ brought in folks from 2 different divisions to talk with the public because there were different permits that were under different divisions. And so at this public meeting, they actually were attempting to give good information to the public about the legal requirements and the permit details of these 2 different permits. It was a robust discussion, and there was a hearing officer's recommendation, but it was really limited to the DEQ issues, rules, and concerns when we're talking about the DEQ permit to align RNG. And if you look at both of the slide presentations that were put out that day, they were really focused on just the processes that were being permitted, locations, and what could be considered in those permits in terms of the regulations. But there really wasn't any discussion of either the Title VI complaint of 2014, what the standards are for looking at Title VI, what the EJ reports themselves showed. That was not included in these presentations, nor any of the research that I alluded to earlier regarding disparate impact and health outcomes, including that of health concerns. Also missing were less harmful alternatives. There are alternatives to processing of waste from a biogas digester that include those that were identified in the Smithfield Agreement, like super soils, but also technologies that were subsequently developed and implemented by private enterprise. One of them is the Lloyd Ray Farm project that I'm going to mention at the very end of this. Next slide, please. Then in 2021, just very recently, a Title VI complaint was filed against NCDEQ, and they talked about in there the fact that the environmental justice report had been prepared, but it only evaluated the demographics and socioeconomics, but did not talk about how they could take actions to reduce those impacts. And given that there are other authorities beyond those that are just for the swine waste permitting, under which those could have been required, that is an issue to be decided in the evaluation of the Title VI complaint by the U.S. EPA, which is the recipient of these. So, next slide, please. I did want to point out that when it comes to biogas, in addition to those technologies that were evaluated, and like super soils by Dr. Williams, super soils did not involve biogas. This project did, but it used the biogas to power waste treatment technology on the farm and power the farm itself. That's called Lloyd Ray Farm. I trust this technology with my body, since I actually walked up on top of that digester myself, the one that you see the bubble there. I've walked on top of that, so I trust it with my with what would have been a very unfortunate accident if it were to be pierced and I would fall through. This technology did operate and did work successfully. It does cost more, and there's no doubt that that is an issue. Next slide, please. And this is just my contact information. I think we're holding questions to the end. Is that right, Sherry?
That is correct, unless the board has a question that they feel they need to ask now. Okay, thank you, Reich. We will turn to Dr. Clausen for his presentation now.
Hi, thank you. And thank all of you for attending and inviting me to talk about the processes of digesters and swine manure treatment. I have been at NC State since January of 1995 in my current role as faculty in biological and agricultural engineering. And if you recall Reich's introductory, or the first part of his remarks, 1995 was right in the middle of the events that have really not let up until now, and they're still going on. My goal here is to just talk about the processes of digesters and lagoons to clarify the differences in these technologies, even though they both have the term anaerobic in them. Next slide, please. Digesters are similar to lagoons. They are anaerobic in nature, at least in part. Lagoons are called anaerobic lagoons, but there are some important differences. Next, please. I'm going to talk primarily about the process. Swine manure is moved into lagoons from the barns. Next, please. The lagoon is a combined storage and treatment structure. It is engineered to hold a certain amount of wastewater and manure until land application is possible. And there is a design for biological treatment, primarily by anaerobic bacteria. Next, please. The effluent from the lagoon is used to flush that manure to the swine barns. And subsequently, the effluent is irrigated onto fields in the spray field configuration. Next, please. The conditions in lagoons are unmixed. There is no mixer there. There is certainly some movement of liquid and solids in the lagoon because of the natural flow of the liquid and because of biological activity, but there is no mixer. There is dissolved oxygen at the surface because it's exposed to the air and because of rainwater is falling right on top of that, but it is insufficient to really call it an aerobic system. Anaerobic conditions take over at lower levels. Next, please. And that combined, that set of conditions leads to incomplete breakdown of carbon, organic materials, relatively low conversion to methane, and leaves residual organics, organic matter, and polymers of various sorts that are in the wastewater. Next, please. Those volatile organics lead to, those are volatile, so they leave the lagoon into the air. They're odorous. The carbon dioxide and methane that are the products of anaerobic digestion are emitted to the atmosphere, as well as some of the ammonia. There's not a lot of driving force to remove ammonia by volatilization, but the concentration is sufficient in the lagoon that it is constant. And the other factor that drives that is the large surface area of lagoons. And so there is a relatively small but constant emission of ammonia. It's by no means going to empty the lagoon of nitrogen and ammonia. There is still plenty that will be available in the effluent for irrigation. Next, please. We put a cover on that digester, which is what most of the digesters here in the state we're talking about. They are in-ground structures. They put a cover on that. The swine manure is then taken to the digester. Next. The conditions there are, of course, because that is covered, no oxygen no oxygen enters that system. It's fully anaerobic, and the systems here are mixed in the state. Next, please. Now, those conditions lead to a more complete breakdown of the organic matter, higher conversion to methane. Next. That carbon dioxide and methane, next please, is released from the covered of the digester. Those bubbles that you saw in the black plastic from Reich's presentation, they're taken by pipe to a biogas processing facility rather than being released to the air. Next. Now, of course, you still have to have the wastewater coming out of that digester because of the mixing and because of process considerations to maximize the methane production. You are going to have the daily flow in equal to the daily flow out. You're not going to have that digester extremely large. And the designs here in the state put that effluent into a storage pond. So next, please. Those conditions then not only lead to the more complete breakdown and higher conversion, but that breakdown includes higher mineralization of nutrients, of nitrogen and phosphorus. It leads to more ammonia that is both soluble and volatile in that storage pond, and more of the ammonia, more of the nitrogen is in the ammonia form that has to be land applied. The recycle then is from the storage pond rather than from the digester. Next. So although that the greater breakdown means that there are a lower concentration of volatile organics, that means there is less odor, but because there is also because of the greater breakdown, there is more dissolved phosphorus and ammonia in the effluent, and more ammonia that's available then for emissions to the atmosphere. Next, please. We'll take questions, I guess, at the end. The last thing I want to mention, though, that is an important part of the process is the land application, and the dissolved nature of or the mineralized nature of ammonia and phosphate mean that those materials are more likely to move through the soil quickly, especially the soils that we have in eastern North Carolina. There are no soils very few soils in the country in which any nutrients, no matter the source, whether manure or inorganic fertilizer purchased from Tractor Supply, there are no soils that will actually hold on to all of that. And the problems in the Gulf of Mexico and the Great Lakes are testimony to that. That is not surface runoff. That's not anybody doing anything wrong. It's the nature of agriculture, is that those leak. And the concentration of farms in the state, in our region, contributes to that, because the soils that and ecosystem that might absorb the nutrients and use those nutrients from one farm can't do that from the hundreds of farms that are in the same area, in the same watershed. So thank you, and I'll take questions later.
Thank you, Dr. Clausen. Next, we'll hear from Kemp Burdett, and following Kemp Burdett will be Dr. Jacoby Wilson. Kemp, are you there? Go ahead.
Okay, sorry, I was muted. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, thank you.
Sherry said my name is Kemp Burdett. I'm the river keeper for Cape Fear River Watch, and I've worked on these water quality issues, including issues related to CAFOs, concentrated animal feeding operations, for the last 13 years. And I appreciate being invited to talk a little bit about biogas and CAFOs. Before I begin, I want to just real quickly note that my organization, Cape Fear River Watch, has challenged the issuance of 4 water quality permits by NCDEQ for 4 facilities that are part of the Aligned Biogas Pilot Project in Buckley and Sampson counties. That first slide is a satellite image of the area around Taylor's Bridge, Buckley County. I frequently fly over Buckley and Sampson counties to get a better view of what happens on CAFOs, because that's usually the only way you can see these facilities, which are largely kind of hidden from the public's view. There's 150 CAFOs in this slide, and I highlighted the waterways that run through this area. So each little red circle is a CAFO, either a swine or a poultry CAFO, and the blue there are streams. You know, the eastern part of the state is just covered with CAFOs, and the Cape Fear Basin in particular. There are more CAFOs concentrated in the Cape Fear River Basin than any other place on Earth. And those CAFOs generate enormous amounts of waste. Those animals, as has been described, are kept inside, close quarters. The animal waste falls through the floor and is washed into a lagoon. And then that waste is either sprayed in the case of swine or spread in the case of poultry onto the landscape of eastern North Carolina. The other thing, next slide, the other thing that covers the Cape Fear River Basin is water. And you can see how closely, next slide, you can see how closely situated water and these CAFOs are. You frequently see from the air that swine lagoons are just kind of surrounded by creeks and streams and wetlands and swamps. And there's a lot, you know, there's the main stem of the Cape Fear River, the Northeast Cape Fear River, the Black River, the South River, Rockfish Creek, Great and Little Cohari Creek, Six Runs Creek, Stocking Head Creek, Doctors Creek, Mill Creek, Nahunga Creek, Goshen Swamp, Big Swamp, Bearskin Swamp, Rise Swamp, Maple Branch, Gum Branch. I mean, I could go on for the entire evening just listing the thousands, over 1,000 waterways in the Cape Fear Basin. And these things, factory farms that spread untreated waste over the landscape, and public trust waterways shouldn't really go together. There's this claim made by the CAFO industry and by supporters of the industry that CAFOs don't discharge waste into waterways, but anybody who's spent any time in or around CAFOs knows that that claim is just obviously false. Next slide. You can see, you know, how that happens here. There's a spray field kind of in the middle of that photo, a creek running through. Next slide. This waste is frequently over applied onto fields, creating, you know, little headwater streams of swine waste that runs off into nearby ditches and streams and eventually into creeks. You can go through the next slide. This is a broken sprayer running off directly into a stream, creating this. This is a creek of swine waste here. Next slide. This is a waste over applied to a field that has ponded and has run down towards the barns and then into this ditch, which is running off the field to another stream. I see. And I have seen countless examples of this swine waste being discharged into waterways. I see regular violations of the minimal regulations in place for poultry waste. And I'm completely confident that tomorrow when I get in an airplane and fly over the Cape Fear Basin that I will see more violations of this. Water quality in the Cape Fear Basin and throughout eastern North Carolina really is significantly impacted by waste from CAFOs. And people's ability to swim safely and recreate in and drink from and fish from their waterways is diminished because of CAFOs in eastern North Carolina. And CAFO waste, just to know, doesn't just pollute surface water, creeks and rivers, it also pollutes groundwater wells and the air that people around those facilities breathe. Biogas, which we're talking about tonight, like projects like the Align project, will do nothing in my mind to improve water quality. In fact, biogas seems likely to actually further degrade water quality by concentrating waste in anaerobic digesters, as we just described, and then discharging it onto the landscape via the lagoon and spray field system. The water quality impacts of CAFOs are kind of epitomized by a tributary of the Northeast Cape Fear in Duplin County called Stocking Head Creek. Dr. Mike Mallon with UNCW Center for Marine Science is an expert on water quality issues associated with CAFOs, and he studied Stocking Head Creek and in 2015 published a peer-reviewed scientific journal article on his findings. And I'll just summarize by saying that he found very high concentrations of fecal coliform bacteria, ammonia, and nitrate in Stocking Head Creek, which is an area that is kind of surrounded by numerous CAFOs, just like many of the creeks that I was starting to rattle off earlier. I also sampled Stocking Head Creek kind of probably hundreds of times over the last 10 years or so. And if you go to the next slide, this is an example of some of the highest bacteria levels. This bar on the right is a fecal coliform reading of 120,000 colony forming units per 100 milliliters of water. There's actually a bar on the left. You can't really see it because it's kind of overshadowed by this larger bar, but it's down here at the very bottom. That's 200. 200 is what the state has established as the safe level for fecal coliform in waterways. So that number is, 120,000 compared to 200 is kind of hard to even conceptualize. But if you say that the average height of a one-story house is 16 feet tall, and you try to think of something to compare that to, that you can visualize, it would be like stacking 66 Empire State Buildings from top to bottom next to a one-story conventional home. So just incredibly high levels of bacteria found in and around the streams near CAFOs throughout eastern North Carolina. Dr. Mallon's research also showed that nutrient levels were off the chart in Stockinghead Creek, so nitrogen and phosphorus, and based on the hundreds of samples that Cape Fear River Watch has taken over the last decade, the same goes for many of the other waterways in the Cape Fear Basin. High levels of nutrients lead to algal blooms, sometimes toxic algal blooms. They lead to low oxygen levels and dead zones marked by fish kills. Based on Dr. Mallon's study and our own understanding of how badly polluted and unsafe water quality in Stockinghead Creek had become, and again, Stockinghead Creek is just illustrative of other creeks throughout the Cape Fear Basin, Cape Fear River Watch petitioned to have the creek added to the EPA 303D list, which is basically a list of the nation's most polluted waterways. And then once a water body is added to that list, the goal is to come up with a plan to clean that up. But that process took a long time, and it was very convoluted, and the analysis by state certified labs is expensive. And as you heard earlier, Stockinghead Creek is just one of the many creeks in the Cape Fear Basin. So you might think that given the situation I just described, the numerous violations that I've reported over the last 6 years, and the numerous scientific studies that show water quality in the state is seriously impaired by CAFO pollution, the fact that operators on CAFOs are left to self-report spills, which not surprisingly they don't often do. You might think that inspectors would frequently visit these facilities, that you might think that they would make regular flights, take regular samples from creeks and streams near CAFOs and monitor groundwater wells. You might think that after a Title VI settlement that required the state to conduct source tracking to determine where all the bacteria in public waterways was coming from, that the state would be doing everything possible to understand the impacts of CAFOs on human health and the environment, but that is not happening. And water quality in the Cape Fear Basin is continuing to get worse and worse. Dr. Mallon's research shows that throughout the watershed over the last 20 years or so, water quality in watersheds that are impacted by CAFOs is getting worse and worse and worse, and significantly worse. And that's just during normal conditions. During tropical storms and hurricanes, things get much worse, just like the storms are getting much worse. Hurricane Matthew devastated eastern North Carolina in 2016, flooded countless swine CAFOs and poultry CAFOs. And then Florence came along 2 years later and was even worse than Matthew. Lagoons ruptured, complete ruptures of lagoons. They were overtopped and inundated. We can go to the next slide. So, this is where these facilities are built. They're in the floodplain, and the floodplain is no longer well defined with the increase in flooding that we're seeing. Next slide. Entire lagoons that just rupture and spill into whatever waterway they're closest to. Next slide. And then, what happens when those lagoons rupture or are overtopped is that they move downstream with those floodwaters into communities. So I live in rural Pender County. I live on the Black River in rural Pender County, downstream of one of those ruptured lagoons. And my house was flooded pretty badly after Florence, up well over the kitchen counters. And I'm pretty familiar with the smell of hog waste. I've been up close and personal with hog lagoons, and That's exactly what my house smelled like after the flood. And so I'm quite confident that all of the waste that left those CAFOs during Florence, some of it ended up in my house. Biogas is not being proposed in a vacuum. And there are other serious issues to consider when evaluating the impacts of swine biogas and the impacts that it may have on communities and the environment. And one of those is the explosion of poultry CAFOs in North Carolina. Next slide. That explosion of poultry CAFOs is happening right in the same area where you already have the most swine CAFOs. So you're stacking waste upon waste. And again, every time I fly, I see a new poultry farm being built. And every single time I fly, I see these huge piles of poultry waste out in fields, uncovered, frequently left uncovered for weeks or months at a time. And they're sitting right next to the spray fields where swine waste is being sprayed. And so that means that we already have a situation where the ecosystem can't absorb the amount of waste produced on swine farms, and here we are stacking poultry waste on top of it. And so a real need to look at the cumulative impact of all these waste streams exists, because we are very quickly reaching the breaking point for North Carolina rivers. So in summary, biogas will not solve the CAFO crisis in North Carolina that existed before biogas and in ways that didn't involve biogas. In many ways, I think biogas will make that CAFO crisis worse, especially as it's currently proposed. It will entrench a waste management system reminiscent of the Middle Ages, and it will make water quality impacts even worse. It will crisscross communities with gas pipelines, and it will do all of this while climate change makes hurricanes worse, and while poultry CAFOs add even more poop to public waterways. Thank you.
Thank you, Kip. Next we'll have Dr. Jacoby Wilson.
I have some slides. Can I share them from my end? This question again. Can I share my content?
Yes, sorry, Dr. Wilson, I was trying to make you the presenter. Did you get
Oh, I
that
got it.
notification?
Yeah, it enabled. Thank you. Thank you. So, thank you for this invitation, Dr. Jacoby Wilson. I'll try to make sure I'm brief, which most of y'all who know me know I'm not that brief, but some of the previous presenters have already covered some of the items I wanted to cover, but I wanted to get into, some of the larger EJ issues. So as was always talked about, we know some of the concerns with these facilities, and just in general, just want to show a slide that looks at some of the waste that's produced, how much waste that's produced from these facilities. So you can see this table that shows the amount of liquid waste and the slurry. And so think about, again, which I'll get to, what are some of the potential impacts on air quality and water quality, which has been talked about by previous presenters, and also those impacts on human health. We want to talk about this issue of CAFOs in North Carolina. It's an environmental racism issue. So getting to the first speakers about disparate impact, the burden itself is a disparate impact. And so we know the differential rates of hosting and proximity of these facilities to communities of color. And we know, as the previous speaker just said, this will lead to entrenchment. The adding of biogas facilities in an area that's already dealing with environmental injustice and environmental racism is just exacerbating additional environmental racism. And as my mentor said, Dr. Steve Wing said, who created this slide that I just want to show y'all just to talk about the EJ issues. This is an example of environmental slavery. And Dr. Wing created this actual slide that showed the percent enslaved people of African descent, enslaved population in 1860, and comparing that to the industrial hog operations. You see a spatial pattern, you see a correlation, right? So we talk about environmental racism and statistically showing the differential burden of these facilities based on race ethnicity, but you also have a connection to the history of slavery and the state of North Carolina. And this is just another slide to show y'all real quickly Dr. Wing's work on looking at the differential burden of these facilities based on race, ethnicity, and also SES. So we see disparities based on race, and we also see disparities based on SES, and also the intersection of them too. Let me keep it moving. So when we get to the next slide, why are these the issue? Other speakers already talked about it. You got the lagoon system, you have the houses themselves, and you have the spray fields. Now you think about the health impacts. You have potential sources of health impacts with all three parts of the CAFO, okay? So the waste that are being blown out of the houses, those toxic gases that can impact people who live nearby, also the volatilization of gases, the infiltration of the waste into groundwater, and then also the spray itself. You know, you think about the liquid that when people are outside at their homes trying to enjoy their property and how it gets into their houses, those impacts, right? And then we think about, again, it's already covered by the previous speaker, some environmental impacts. Just real quick on this slide, there's microbial issues too. So most folks who live in rural North Carolina, who live in rural areas, they're on, do they have access to publicly regulated sewer and water infrastructure? No, they're on well water. So that's the physical vulnerability. So you have, it's just not your proximity to the hazard itself. It's the fact that if you're on well water, that's a physical vulnerability that increases your risk of exposure to chemicals and also microbes. And you see the list of various serotypes of E. coli, salmonella, which leads to salmonellosis, giardia leads to giardiasis, cryptosporidiosis, and of course, MRSA. And there's been some work done by one of my colleagues, Chris Haney, that show that for both workers and people who live near these industrial hog operations, that exposure to MRSA is an issue. So think of exposure to MRSA, there's other biological agents that have been a concern for this community, this population more recently, and that's the SARS-CoV-2 virus. So what are some of the health issues, right? So you think about as this previous speaker mentioned, the contaminants in drinking water have exposure to nitrates, can lead to blue baby syndrome. There's some studies that talked about maybe there's some reproductive effects and development effects of exposure to nitrates. So if you're on well water and you're drinking runoff from a hog operation, and now as the previous speaker mentioned, you have the double whammy of both hog waste from the lagoons and spray fields, and now chicken litter, which was a euphemism. Y'all know that's chicken, something else, but let me keep going. What are some of these health effects? What are some of the main pollutants? So when you think about the wind blown, the fans blowing out the gases from the houses, you have ammonia and you have hydrogen sulfide. I did my dissertation on looking at the atmospheric levels of ammonia near human receptor sites in close proximity to hog farms, right? So I know a lot about ammonia. You have impacts on human health, headaches, eye irritation, potentially neurological dysfunction. Of course, children who are living in these facilities can be impacted as well. And remember, children have a higher inhalation rate per kilogram body weight compared to adults, right? And of course, there's organ systems are still developing. Hydrogen sulfide is an issue as well, okay? And then you think about issues around volatile organic compounds, particulate matter. So particulate matter that dust in the air, that can cause effects. And the bioaerosols, those aerosols contain, again, biological agents, some microbes and other biological features. So you're exposed to the plume, you're being exposed to not just chemical, but biological agents as well. So let's kind of go through some of these health effects. I'm going to go through a little bit slower because I have way too many slides. You've seen increased levels of infant mortality, mortality due to anemia, kidney disease, and tuberculosis, septicemia for folks who live near hog CAFOs, higher hospital admission rates, higher ER visits, low birth weight babies. For folks who live near CAFOs, respiratory issues, decline in quality of life, irritation, as I already said, mental health impacts. Also, when you think about exposure, decreased lung function, when you're exposed to the PM, in this case, PM10, which is the larger particles, increased respiratory difficulty, sore throat, chest tightness. So think about that again, that plume. That plume is made of multiple pollutants, hydrogen sulfide, over hundreds of volatile organic compounds. You have ammonia, you have particulate matter, you have bioaerosols. So you have, as a previous speaker mentioned, the cumulative impacts of just the air pollution, y'all. This is just the air itself. So it's impacting respiratory system, it's impacting nervous systems, it impacts development, it impacts reproduction, it's leading to mortality issues. So when you think about some of the specific work of Dr. Steve Wing and some of his collaborators, again, impacts on mental health have been shown, more anger, fatigue, nausea for folks who live near these facilities, impacts on immune function. So exposures can have a suppressive effects on your immune functioning. And again, asthma in children. And just real quickly, this issue of ammonia and biogas plants, if you look at the CAFOs themselves, if you live near these facilities, they're going to be higher levels of ammonia. So I just have a few slides. I'm not going to show them, to just harken back to my dissertation research that I did again about 15 years ago, and just showing the closer you are to these facilities, these CAFOs, the higher the ammonia levels are. So the closer you are to the facilities, not just the higher the ammonia levels are, the higher the PM levels are, the higher the bioaerosols, the higher the level of hydrogen sulfide, the higher the level of the volatile organic compounds. Again, but it's the plume, it's the cumulative impact of that plume is important. And as the previous speaker mentioned, when you think about entrenchment, we have hurricanes. So the hurricanes are going to impact these biogas facilities, right? So it's going to impact the hog CAFOs, it's going to impact the poultry operations, it's also going to impact the biogas plants themselves. And so we know what happened with Hurricane Florence in 1999. Hurricane Florence dumped 11 trillion gallons of rain in North Carolina. So we're going to see additional climate change perturbations, particularly more hurricanes. So that means we're putting at risk the people who live near these facilities. We're putting at risk our ecosystems that are near these facilities. We're going to see more issues with air quality, water quality, and negative human health impacts. If you looked across both the lagoons, the hog houses, and the spray fields, right, then you bring the biogas plants, you got to take into account, as the previous speaker mentioned, the cumulative impacts of these things on human health. And then people on well water, the additional risk of exposure to contaminants and adverse health effects for folks who consume well water, the additional risk for children who live in these facilities and go to school in these facilities, the additional risk to workers, the additional risk to pregnant women, the additional risk to susceptible populations who are right now not being protected from CAFOs due to right to farm laws and other legal maneuvering in the state of North Carolina that's undermine the ability of these facilities to be covered by the Emergency Planning Community Regional Act or the Clean Air Act or the Clean Water Act in a more sufficient way, or other laws like Toxic Substance Control Act. So when you think about biogas facilities, we already have this issue with the CAFOs. The previous speaker from North Carolina State talked about the methane issue. He mentioned in the slide, as you show the graphic depiction, there'll be a reduction in VOCs and odors, but there'll still be VOCs, but there will be more ammonia. And you just heard me say about the respiratory effects of ammonia and some of the other adverse effects of ammonia on human health. So going to biogas is not going to lead to a removal of total impacts on the environment or removal of total exposure and health risks for nearby populations, particularly those most susceptible populations, again, children, pregnant women, occupational workers, people who live in close proximity, are elderly, who are already not being protected from these operations. I have more slides to cover, but I feel like I'm getting close to time, so I'll end my time. Thank you. Share screen.
Thank you, Dr. Wilson. Thank you, Dr. Wilson, for your time. And Chair Johnson, I will turn it back over to you, but I believe this is the time for the interaction or discussion with the board members. And we do have our community members on the line now, and Naima will introduce them so that you can facilitate that conversation with them.
Sure, absolutely. Are you saying we should have questions before the presenters, or how do you want to do that, Ms. White?
Well, I'm looking at the time, and I'm going to allow them to speak, but I also am cognizant that the board would probably have questions that they may want to ask as well.
So, do we have questions for our panelists? I can't see everyone, so
Mr. Chair, this is Veronica. I have one.
Okay, well then I will let Naima introduce our community members. Oh, go ahead, Veronica. I'm sorry.
That's okay, Sherry. Actually, it's more of a comment and a question, and Kemp, you can jump in if you'd like to. Kemp and I have worked together on EJ in southeastern North Carolina for a while, and one of the things that Cape Fear River Watch led was a fish consumption study on fish coming out of the Cape Fear River. And the way that we found this was because we were working against letting a cement factory be let on the Cape Fear River. And we kept telling people folks were eating the fish out of the river. And when I say people, I'm talking regulators from DEQ, regulators from EPA. And no one believes that people eat the fish out of these creeks and streams and rivers that all of these great presenters have shown here in their presentations. But when you are poor, when you're an ECJ community, you eat and find your subsistence where you can. And some of those fish coming out of those rivers that are just as impaired because of everything that they're eating that's in those water fields are also going into people in other ways, not just through air, not just through drinking water. So I just wanted to kind of put that out. And Kemp, if you want to jump in, feel free, or anyone else.
Yeah, I mean, I'll just say, you know, we do a lot of driving and a lot of sampling, and at every single bridge crossing I see in Duplin and Sampson County of a body of water that's any bigger than you could step across, the trees around that bridge are just covered in what look like tiny little Christmas ornaments, which are bobbers from where people have had their fishing line caught in the tree. So based on the number that I see hanging in the trees, there were a lot more in the water. So very clear evidence that people are doing a lot of fishing in those creeks. And of course, I see people fishing fairly frequently as well.
Emma, you want to introduce our guests, other guests?
Okay, can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thanks. And of course, I want to thank our presenters so far and for participating in the excellent presentations. And so now I would like to introduce our community members. Now I'm having technical difficulties, so I can't tell if all the community members are here, but I will introduce them, and whoever's present can begin speaking. First, we have Devon Hall, who is the founder and program officer manager for the Rural Empowerment Association for Community Health, better known as REACH, out of Duplin County. And we have Robert Moore, who is the Duplin County, he's the president, if I'm not mistaken, of the Duplin County NAACP. We have Reverend Jimmy Melton, who is the pastor at Mount Zion AMEZ Church in Sampson County. And we have Ed Gilliam, who is a Sampson County resident. And those are our community speakers for tonight. Devon, you can kick us off. And thank y'all for being willing to come forth and speak.
Good evening. Can everyone hear me clearly?
Yes.
Yes.
Again, I am Devon Hall. I'm co-founder and the executive director of the Rural Empowerment Association for Community Health, known to most people as REACH, located in Duplin County. And, you know, it's sad that whenever you say you're from Duplin County, born and raised in Duplin County is also known as hog capital of the world. You know, there's a lot that I could say. The other presenters, as you know, pretty much said everything that I had, you know, noted I was going to speak on. But I do want to thank, you know, this board for taking the time to at least hear what we, the community, and the other presenters had to say. I was present in Raleigh when this board was first was made public. You know, during that time, you know, REACH with the water keepers and the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network was negotiating a Title VI settlement complaint with DEQ. One of my concerns is to this board is, like many other meetings, and Zoom, public hearings or whatever that we've been on, and I don't know how busy that, some of the people that's serving on this board are, but we, the people that's, here in these communities is doing the groundwork, grassroots work. We're always addressing so many different issues, and it takes a lot of our time. I've got another meeting ongoing right here in my office right now. So one of my concerns is with this particular board, how, and I know several of the people on this board, very well, friends, have worked with them for many years, like Naima, Marilyn, Sherry, Jamie Cole, and I can go on and on. But at the same time, with this particular board, when it was established, my concern now, is it going to be used just as a check in the box, a check off the box? Or does it have any authority that it can go back and persuade DEQ to really think twice about the issue of these permits, listening closely what the people in these communities have to say? Because for the most part, that's pretty much what we want. We want you to hear us, and not just hear us, but really think close and take some actions. When we begin to talk about biogas, methane digesters, and we look at the CAFOs that's in our community, whether they're swine or poultry. And for the most part, there's nothing that we can see that's environmentally friendly about a methane digester. So with all that, with anything that I would have to say, I really want to hear questions from this board, those that have not been in this area, those that may not be fully aware of what we have to live with, every day. I've said on many occasions that it's not our position to try to put any contract grower out of business. But at the same time, we recognize that there has been some superior technologies developed, and known to us now as the ESTs. So we're saying, put those, that technology work. The methane digesters, as it stands right by itself, does not, meet the standards of the ESTs. And so again, there's so many other things about these digesters that concerns us. The cumulative impact, where they're going to be placed. You can't, you're going with the line project, you're talking about 19 farms, 39 miles of pipelines in a community that's already, so heavily impacted with swine. So now we're looking at, something else that we're going to have to deal with. So again, for the most part, I kind of want this board to be asking us questions. And then I want to, I would like to know if this board, whenever they go back and talk with DEQ, if they can really find a way to convince DEQ to really do its job. Start doing some regulating, start doing some monitoring, start doing some enforcement. Because it's sad that, there's organizations like Reef, like water keepers are flying over, daily at some point. And they're documenting what they're seeing on the ground. And there's nothing being done to protect the people in these communities. And again, I was born and raised here. I still live here. There's been a lot of research done. We've been involved with research since 2004. We partnered with Dr. Stephen Wing at UNC Chapel Hill. We partnered with Dr. Chris Hing at Johns Hopkins University. We received funding from US EPA to address these same issues. In 2007, we received a collaborative problem solving grant from US EPA. 3 years that we pulled together stakeholders, including the industry, the swine industry. And it's sad that with all this time, all the research, all the data, that we're still, just marching time. So again, my question, my concern to this board is, what can you do to help shed some light on what we're living with daily? And even with DEQ, no transparency. I mean, how are you going to permit a line, and these farms to add on or connect to this facility? And then they've already said there's going to be 19 farms, but they can't tell us the name of the farms. There's a problem with that, So again, what, where, and how. I look back at the Title VI complaint that we filed in 2014, and how hard that was, trying to get not just DEQ to listen, but then the industry stepped in and they want to be a part of that, which it shouldn't have. And how that we had to walk away and petition EPA. We had to travel to DC and with a delegation of community members, petition EPA to come and see for themselves. And EPA did. And I think they interviewed, I think 80 some households. And they wrote a 16-page letter back to DEQ. So that being, when that happened, now DEQ was ready to come back to the table and talk. They wanted to negotiate. And yes, in 2018, that we did reach a settlement. But that's not enough. So again, we're wanting DEQ, we're wanting this body to report back to DEQ and say, look, we got to do more for the people living in these communities. There has to be some justice somewhere, somehow. I look at the presentation that Dr. Jacoby Wilson gave, and when he talked about where these facilities are, and look at that map, and it's you're looking at slave communities. And at what point are we going to move? We're looking in the 21st century, and even now with the technology, and yes, because of COVID, a lot of time we can't do face-to-face meetings. We had to adapt and learn how to do the virtual meetings, which is hard in some cases because here we are in this community, we don't have broadband in certain areas. So we're hindered in that way. So again, we want this body, this board to, look close. And we don't want this to be just a check in the box. With the Smithfield Agreement, with NC State, and again, it's been said, technology that we develop, we're saying put it on the ground. With the 2007 moratorium, they can't build any more hog farms unless they adapt the ESTs. But at the same time, it looks like DEQ is going to permit this Alliance project to move forward. We got to have some help. We need some answers. We talk about greenhouse gases. We know that these lagoons, spray fields, or K-foods, swine K-foods, is a great contributor to greenhouse gases. We talk about climate change. There it is, the greenhouse gases. We talk about the history of hurricanes that have devastated, our communities, in eastern North Carolina. Again, and then we look at the North Carolina General Assembly. And to me, how it's just overstepping itself, just taking charge of DEQ. If nothing else, we're looking at the bill that will pass, the unconstitutional bills that will pass to block anyone else from suing. So now, if someone is harmed that lives close to a methane digester that they're getting ready to build, there's nothing, we don't have any public recourse. So it's up to this body, if they can, to go back to DEQ.
Excuse me, Devon. Okay, can we we need to start wrapping it up so that the other community members will have an opportunity to speak so that we can engage with the board in case they have questions for you all.
Okay, well, I'm pretty close to finish, but again, I would like to know that, meeting with this board, that they will go back to DEQ and we can get some results, we can get some answers. Thank you.
Thank you, Devon. Mr. Moore, Robert, please.
I think I've unmuted myself. Can you hear me? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Well, good evening, everyone. And I thank you for inviting me to be included and to participate in this forum. My name is Robert O. Moore, and I'm the sitting president of the NAACP of Duplin County. I was glad to gain further knowledge and insight from the proposed biogas operations in Duplin and Sampson County from the experts. Now, I am by no means a scientific expert. Nevertheless, as many of you are aware, a primary objective of the NAACP is to seek the enactment and enforcement of federal, state, and local laws securing civil rights. Demographic studies have shown that people of color disproportionately bear the burden of pollution from industrial hog operations. The fact of the matter is that Native Americans, African Americans, and Latinx Americans are respectively 2.18, 1.54, and 1.39 times more likely to live within 3 miles of industrial hog operations than their white counterparts. If you live in eastern North Carolina, you know that hurricanes which result in flooding are much more frequent occurrences than times of the past. The concern of the NAACP is that these projects will make pollution of our rivers, streams, and air we breathe across eastern North Carolina even worse. I'm here to be the voice of those marginalized, those most vulnerable, and those most likely to be affected negatively by these operations, and which are also less likely to be heard or recognized in these proceedings. We're asking that the DEQ consider the cumulative impacts of all the pollution sources in this area when drafting permits for this project. We're appealing to the DEQ to include monitoring provisions in the permit to evaluate the impacts of biogas operations on the environment and on public health. We're requesting that the DEQ ensure that the permitting process is transparent and that the public has complete information and that the public has ample opportunity to provide input in the permitting process for this project. Now, we already know that it is biogas, that this biogas is not truly renewable resource like solar and wind energy, because the emissions that biogas depends on are not naturally occurring. Pipelines transporting biogas can leak harmful greenhouse gas emission into the air. The bottom line is that biogas makes water pollution worse and does little to address the noxious odors from the industrial hog operations. 20 years ago, Smithfield proposed and promised to install cleaner technology to deal with hog waste, and in fact invested millions of dollars of their own money to research cleaner technology. However, the corporation has refused to implement any cleaner technology to clean up the water, the air, or the foul odors, citing the cost of doing so was too expensive. Yet the cost of this biogas project rivals the cost that it would have been to implement cleaner and safer technology to ensure the safety of those living near these operations, but now threatens to put an even larger population at risk with the pipelines and processing facilities in the heart of our communities. Furthermore, the impacted communities are not expected to receive any benefits, any additional protection, or any other consideration from these biogas projects to account for the added pollution, the health burden, or the diminished quality of life as a result of these projects. My question at this point is, when is enough money enough money? Smithfield, already a billion-dollar corporation, stands to make billions of more dollars on the backs of those who are most often the forgotten ones in our communities. The DEQ must protect our communities, and the EAB should advise the DEQ secretary on this matter to prevent the agency's permitting decisions from having a discriminatory impact on our communities of color and low-income families and individuals. These protections should require the immediate implementation of developed technology proven to reduce the impacts of the environment around, already in use in other areas of the country, and include long-term research on the cumulative impacts of all populations and the pollution sources in this area. I thank you for your time. And again, my name is Robert O'More, President, NAACP of Duplin County.
Thank you, Mr. Moore. And now I can't tell if we have Reverend Melvin and Mr. Gilliam on the call, but if you're on, would you please begin your presentation? And we're allowing about 3 minutes for each one, so that we'll leave time for the board to interact. Thanks, everybody. Can anybody see if Reverend Melvin and Mr. Gilliam are on?
I'm here. I'm here, ma'am. This is Edgar Miller.
I'm on.
Go ahead.
Reverend Melvin, I'm on.
Go ahead, sir.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Reverend Melvin, pastor with Mount Zion Zion Church in the Delaware area and a resident of Sampson County. So it was great to be on to get this information tonight and continue to affirm the position that this is a worthy cause that we should engage and get as many people as possible involved, and which has created a common issue, which is clean water throughout our county, and specifically in our areas where we're so populated with the hog industry. And so this validates taking a position on it, and it challenges people to be engaged and be involved in this process of solving the problem of clean water and everything that comes along with it. So we got quite a few things that it is affecting, and that and strategies to deal with that, but it falls on us in our generation. So I'm just glad to see the willingness to be empowered and to step up to the plate. And because we can't solve the problem, we're part of it. So having us to be informed so we can intelligently defend the positions and call accountability to those that are within the power to make decisions to address this issue, that we might preferably leave this generation better than what we've actually found at this point. So thank you for the opportunity just to listen in, and if I can be of any service and continue to lend my support to what means we have necessary to Artwood. And we definitely got faced with, we had to spend about $4,000 to correct a shadow well in the area where we are in the Taylor Bridge Highway. So we very much know and open to be a help in the way we can. So thank you for this opportunity to share this.
Okay, thanks, Reverend Melvin. And if you're not speaking, please mute yourself. If you're not speaking, please mute. Thank you. And Mr. Gilliam, you can go ahead.
Thank you, ma'am. Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, ma'am and sir. First, I want to just thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. My name is Edward Gillum. I'm actually the chair of the Democratic Party of Sampson County. I didn't really want to use that term there, but I'm proud of it. And I have law enforcement background, protect and serve. And that's one of the things I carry with me at all times. I'm talking to you right now in a little town called Ivanhoe, all the town. It's the littlest place on Black River, not too far from everything. But the thing is, my mother resides here. She's a senior citizen. I have other senior citizens around the area where I'm at. I have a brother. I have a 6-month-old granddaughter. And I say that to say this. We have to clean up. I feel like we should clean up what we have already in place. And this biogas and everything, it just does not seem like something that Sampson County really need. Now, monetarily, probably the company's involved and stuff, but we have to look out for ours. And that's one thing that we need to do and stand up. Because if we don't, we're going to mess around and we're going to lose everything. I mean, what good is the amount of money that you have in your bank account when you don't have anywhere to reside at? Because even though everything is showing on the southern end of the county, like you said, in these rural areas, that still doesn't say that it's in your backyard. So in certain other places, it's going to start actually messing up some other places around in Sampson County. That's what we think about. So if we invest in the problem right now, in cleaning up and doing something about it, I feel like we can make the world a better place. I stand for the communities that can't say anything, some that don't know the information, because there are a lot of people that don't know what's going on in the General Assembly, other places and whatnot. But we need to inform them. We need to stand together, and we need to really do something about this environment, because it's our future. It's our present and our future, and we should invest in it. And like I said, I got 3 minutes. That's fine. I really appreciate everything you guys are doing. I think these meetings are I think they'll be very positive, and it's moving into a positive direction to inform and see what's happening with all the facts and the figures and everything. I really appreciate all that, and I'm glad to be a part of it. So I wish everyone a good night and a God bless.
Thank you, Mr. Gilliam and Devon, Reverend Melvin, and Mr. Moore. Now we turn it back over to our chair, Jim Johnson.
Thank
Thanks,
you so much.
everybody.
Thank you, Naima. I think we can open it up for questions from the board. I have a few minutes here, and then we're going to turn to public comment. Are there questions for any of our speakers? So please identify yourself. Mr. Anstead, go ahead, Jeff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And say hello to everyone. In our language, we say, feel hope to everyone. I want to thank all the presenters and everybody on this. What I didn't see, I heard the mention of indigenous people in North Carolina, but no facts on how these farms, these chicken farms and hog farms are affecting territorial lands that we have. And I would like to see a little bit more in that, a little bit more involvement, I guess, of our people involved in organizations, because we are the original stewards of the land. I give you an example. Most tribes in the state of North Carolina is located in very rural communities. And we know that these industries target rural communities to provide employment. Well, they provide employment, but they're also poisoning our air, land, and water. I'll give you a perfect example. The Coharie tribe in Sampson County. The Coharie tribe is doing an initiative they started a few years ago of renovating and bringing back to life the great Coharie River, and they've done an amazing job. At their tribal administration building, I went down to their powwow last month, and when the sun went down and dew started to fall, the hog farm that's located directly behind them was almost unbearable. I would like to see more tribes get involved because we are the original stewards. My tribe, we're located in Halifax and Warren County. And if anybody know anything about environmental justice, you know the first stand happened in Warren County with the PCP field. We have to think of 7 generations. That's what we're taught. Of making our lands, our water, and our air better for our 7th generations. But I want to thank everybody here today. Great, and I hope that the motivation that I'm receiving, and I hope everybody else is, just don't stop when this meeting is over. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Anstead. Let's take one more question if there's one, and then we need to turn to our public comment period. Want to make sure people have been waiting, want to be respectful of their time as well. Is there any other question from the board?
Mr. Chair, it's not a question. Again, it's a comment. If
Mr.
somebody
Chair.
else has one, go ahead. Whoever it is, go for it.
I think that's Ms. Sherry. Is that you?
Yes, I hope my internet is working. That's why I've been not listening in. My bandwidth is terrible down here in Sampson County tonight. There's one other thing I wanted to bring to the attention of the board. One of the attachments that you received was an advisory letter for the board to consider for signature to pass on to Secretary Beiser. And I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention and to your attention, Chair Johnson. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Ms. White Williamson. Continue, but your comment.
Mr. Chair, I want to just say to the presenters, thank you again. And to Mr. Hall, I heard you when you said, are we just checking off a box? Because I want to say for the record, I feel that way at times. And so I want to challenge not just this board, because I have no doubt that members of this board are going to try to do the right thing, which is to advise. I'm going to challenge those civil servants out there that are work for the state, our state, DEQ, that once we advise you, please take our advice. Please hear their calls to us, and please hear us when we ask you to please help these folks. That's all I got.
Thank you, Ms. Carter. I think we should move to transition to the public comment segment of our meeting. I believe we have 26 people who've signed up to speak. Ms. Kramer will announce the names in order in which the requests were received. She will also announce who is on deck to give comments. Everyone will have 2 minutes to provide their comments. If there is time remaining at the end, we will open up the floor for additional comments. We ask that you raise your hand if you want to speak during that period, or if you're using a computer, and you should dial *3 if you're on the phone and listening in that way. Please leave your hands raised until Ms. Kramer calls on you to share comments so that we can proceed in an orderly and proficient manner. Ms. Kramer, can you start the public comment, please?
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. Yes, so first we have Dr. Leonard Bull. I do not see your name, Dr. Bull, so if you could please raise your hand if you are here, or as Chairman Johnson indicated, press *3 if you're on the phone. And while we wait to see if a hand raises for Dr. Bull, the next speaker after him will be Stephen Norris, followed by Keith Larrick. And I do not see a hand raised for Dr. Bull, so we will move on to Stephen Norris. Mr. Norris, if you have dialed in, if you could please press *3 as well, or raise your hand if you are on the computer. I'm not seeing you either. So following Mr. Norris, we have Keith Larrick, and following Mr. Larrick, we have Lorinda Overman. So Mr. Larrick, you should be unmuted.
Thank you. My name is, I guess I'm the infamous Keith Larrick, who now works at North Carolina Farm Bureau. Biogas projects at swine farms have the potential to reduce methane emissions and improve odors and air quality associated with swine farms. These are two goals that everyone should be in favor of. These aren't just ag industry talking points, but well-supported facts from all levels of state and federal government. Research performed at NC State, mentioned by Dr. Klassen, demonstrates that anaerobic digesters reduce odor emissions by removing hydrogen sulfide and VOCs, and also provide a large pathogen reduction. These benefits have been verified in study after study. I urge the members of this board, whether or not you want to pay attention to a lobbyist from Farm Bureau, I urge you to do some research on this topic for yourselves. So I would point you, in addition to the NC State work, EPA's AgStar program has developed extensive materials related to the benefits of animal waste digesters. Their info is at their website, epa.gov/agstar. I would also encourage you to review the DEQ hearing officer's report for the Align project from earlier this year, where DEQ very clearly outlines their authority related to these projects, and they do address many of the environmental issues brought up here tonight. This report is available on their website. I would hope you've already been provided with that. Finally, I'd encourage you to listen to Brenda Mallory, who is Director of President Biden's Council on Environmental Quality, who recommended the use of methane capture specifically for its ability to help with environmental justice objectives related to hog farming. I want to be clear that we're not talking about new farms, we're talking about existing swine farms. And I do feel like these projects can help existing farms take a step forward and make improvements related to odors, air quality, and greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Larrick. Next, we have Lorenda Overman. Ms. Overman, if you are dialed in, if you could please press *3 or raise your hand because I'm not seeing you either. See, we have a call-in user. Hi, is this Lorenda Overman? No? Okay, we will move on to the next speaker we have signed up is Amanda Strauderman, followed by Alicia Gaines. Give me 1 second, Amanda. All right, Amanda, you should be unmuted.
Okay. Thank you to the board for hosting today's special meeting. My name is Amanda Strauderman with Clean Water for North Carolina. I'd like to use my time to remind DEQ of some of the promises it has made. The following is from DEQ's May 2020 report entitled Title VI, Increasing Equity, Transparency, and Environmental Protection in the Permitting of Swine Operations in North Carolina. On May 3rd, 2018, DEQ entered into a settlement agreement with citizens groups designed to improve regulatory oversight of swine operations and better protect neighboring communities from health and environmental impacts. Under this agreement, DEQ committed to undertake several efforts, including development of an environmental justice mapping tool to better understand how sources of pollution collectively impact communities throughout the state, and ensure meaningful involvement of all affected parties in DEQ's decision-making. This report says, DEQ is committed to conducting the people's business in an open and transparent way, yet this community mapping system is not transparent in that it does not adequately identify pollution threats to the community. Not included in the map are several thousand deemed permitted poultry operations in the state, many of which are located in the very same communities impacted by hog operations. It doesn't even correctly show locations of hog lagoons, instead using single addresses listed on the permit, which can include multiple operations. DEQ asserts that errors and shortcomings of the community tool are irrelevant because they don't ultimately impact their decisions on permits. Yet the stated purpose of the tool is to inform stakeholders when addressing zoning and permitting throughout the state, and it states that DEQ will continue to use the system internally to inform decisions. Part 6 of this report states DEQ is well positioned to carry out additional actions, including the expanded use of the community mapping system in DEQ's decision-making process. We need to hold them to that promise. Yet another promise from the settlement.
Mrs. Strauderman, thank you. Sorry, your 2 minutes has expired. If you would like to provide additional written comments, you are welcome to do so. Thank you. Next, we have Alicia Gaines, followed by Jill Howell. And Alicia Gaines, you have been unmuted.
Thank you very much. I do have a camera, but I don't know why it's not showing. So I'll go ahead and get started. Good evening. Thank you, panel, for listening to me. My name is Alicia Nicole Gaines. I am the chapter chair of the North Carolina Sierra Club. I represent over 100,000 members and supporters statewide who believe environmental justice and a just transition to clean energy. Thank you for my opportunity. I'm concerned about the environmental impact, as the colleagues on your panel has shown, and the health and safety of people who live near these confined animal feeding operations. They're also harmed. And these are outdated lagoons, spray fields, and no matter how you put digesters or lagoons, that spray field has not been called out. So I'm worried about the growth of biogas in our communities and are already affected, suffering pollution from industrial agriculture. Biogas is being greenwashed by the industrial agricultural industry to disguise what it really is, a perpetuation of an outdated, inefficient, and irresponsible method of waste management. The truth is that biogas is, as a hog industry operation isn't clean, it isn't climate friendly, and shouldn't be a part of our energy future. Research has shown that people of color disproportionately bear the burden, and they also suffer from higher death rates caused by anemia, kidney disease, and TB. We should protect our communities. We shouldn't be tricked into thinking that adding biogas will solve all of our problems. In addition, biogas contains impurities even after refinement and compression. That means it can damage vehicles. It can erode metal parts and engines. So therefore, I'm asking that the DEQ take the following actions. And unfortunately, I don't have much time, but I will send these to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gaines. Up next, we have Jill Howell, followed by Reverend Mack. Hold on one second. And Jill, you have been unmuted. You may begin.
Thank you. My name is Jill Howell. I'm the Pamela Gotar Riverkeeper with Sound Rivers, an environmental nonprofit that works to protect, monitor, and enhance the Tar, Pamlico, and Neuse River watersheds. And I'm here to speak on the potential water quality impacts of biogas and urge this board to put forth an advisory statement and recommendations to DEQ. The expansion and installation of anaerobic digesters to capture and create biogas relies on the lagoon and spray field system, one that we know causes water quality impacts. Spray fields, where liquid waste is piped from the lagoons to sprinklers on cropland, poses a runoff risk. We frequently see spraying occurring not just to fertilized fields, but on already saturated ones, so the next time it rains, all of that liquid waste with its excessive nutrients and bacteria gets washed into our waterways. Biogas does nothing to address runoff from the spray fields. Liquid waste will still need to be sprayed, and concentrations of ammonia and phosphates has the potential to be greater. The second water quality issue stemming from this system are the lagoons themselves, holding millions of gallons of solid and liquid waste in a coastal plain where there are not only hurricanes, but heavy rain events dumping inches of rain throughout the year. Overtopping and breaching are a real concern. Last December, approximately 1 million gallons of hog waste were spilled into Tuckahoe Creek in Jones County from a lagoon breach on the DC Mills farm. DEQ had previously cited this operation twice that year for high freeboard levels. On the day of the spill, there was no hurricane, no storm event. In the previous 2 days, there had been less than a quarter inch of rain. It was poor waste management and lagoon maintenance that eventually culminated in a major pollution event. Again, digesters won't solve this problem either. Biogas shouldn't be the path forward pursued by North Carolina, but with the passage of the Farm Act this year requiring a general permit for digesters rather than individual permits, we must now push DEQ to do a better job than they have to develop a strong protective permit with a complete and inclusive participation process. Part of that includes groundwater and surface water monitoring provisions to ensure compliance with the non-discharge requirements.
Thank you, Ms. Howell. We got word that Lorenda Overman was actually on the phone line, so I will go back to try and unmute your line. Hello, Lorenda Overman. You are unmuted on our end.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes, you may begin.
Okay, thank you. My name is Lorinda Overman, and I'm a hog farmer from Wayne County. My husband and I have been farming row crops and raising pigs for 39 years. In addition to my full-time job as a farmer, I am president of the North Carolina Pork Council Board of Directors. The stated purpose of tonight's meeting was a listening session to discuss biogas in North Carolina's communities. I appreciate the board's desire to learn more about these biogas projects and their impact on the community, and to give local residents a chance to learn more as well. But I'm a little disappointed that after seeing the agenda, which was not posted until earlier today, and hearing tonight's presentations, I think anyone listening to these presentations is less likely informed on biogas than they were before. And it's unfortunate that no effort's been made to reach out to the pork industry or anyone involved in these biogas projects. Doing so could have helped provide the board with important facts, context, and perspective. But what's presented tonight has been one-sided and designed to influence how these projects are perceived in the community. I encourage the board to revisit this topic at a future meeting, and I invite people from the pork industry to be on that agenda. I have raised our 3 children 500 yards from our hog farm, and now our 9 grandchildren are being raised likewise. As a farmer, I'm trying my best to improve the world, to farm responsibly, and to pass my farm on to what I hope will be the 8th generation to farm my family's land. My desire to do what's right is not unique, and is something that I have in common with thousands of other hog farmers in North Carolina. We are not bad people. We are really good people, and I think you would find that most of us are actually quite lovely to talk to if you would just engage with us. And I look forward to that opportunity. So thank you so much for your time. I appreciate you circling back to me.
Thank you, Lorenda. Up next, we have Reverend Mack Ledgerton, followed by Margaret Carr. Reverend Mack Ledgerton, you have been unmuted.
Yes, good evening. I'm Reverend Mack Ledgerton. I serve as co-director of the Robeson County Cooperative for Sustainable Development and program director for the North Carolina Climate Solutions Coalitions. I will make 2 recommendations to the EJ and Equity Advisory Board tonight. First, I recommend that the EJ and Equity Board urge the Secretary to change the methane gas related permitting process for factory farms in Align and Dominion Energy and Smithfield to include a full assessment of all the components of the project and treat the project as a whole, becoming fully informed and inform the public of the full scope and scale of its impact prior to evaluating and making decisions on any individual permits. Within its power, DEQ can collect all necessary information from a permit applicant prior to making any permit decisions. This includes all aspects and impacts of a proposed project on environmental and public health. DEQ did not receive information on the location of all the pipelines that will connect the factory farms to a line facility. Consequently, neither DEQ nor the public were or have been fully informed of the impact and scope and scale of the project, including the impact on all land, rivers, streams, and wetland crossings. In effect, DEQ provided permits for one component and part of a second component of this methane gas project without full knowledge and evaluation of the project's cumulative impact on the host communities and county. Second, I recommend that the EJ board urge the secretary that DEQ deny all factory farm methane gas related permits until all aspects of the project have been received by DEQ from the applicant and shared with the public. This includes all energy production facilities, locations of all factory farms, capturing methane gas, and locations of all the pipeline routes.
Thank you, Reverend Mack Ledgerton. Up next, we have Margaret Carr, followed by Blakely Hildebrand. One second. Ms. Carr, I do not see you on the list of attendees. If you have dialed in, if you could please press *3 now to raise your hand. If you are on the computer, if you could also try to raise your hand. All right, we'll move on to Blakely Hildebrand, followed by Cara Schildneck. My apologies if I mispronounced that name. One moment, Blakely Hildebrand. All right, Blakely Hildebrand, you have been unmuted.
Thank you. My name is Blakely Hildebrand. I'm an attorney at the Southern Environmental Law Center, and I just want to thank the board, the members of the board for their service on this important board, and thank you also for calling a special meeting on this really important environmental justice issue. As many of the speakers have recognized, this is a long-standing and well-documented environmental injustice in North Carolina, and I'm glad that this issue has the attention of the board. As you heard tonight, lagoons and spray fields to manage and dispose of billions of gallons of hog waste pollutes rivers and streams and the water that people drink. It also pollutes the air that people breathe. You heard from Mr. Burdett about the widespread and devastating pollution. And as Mr. Clausen described, the industry intends to use digesters to capture methane and other gases and transfer that waste into open air lagoons and spray it onto fields, a process that's likely to increase ammonia emissions and further burden communities living nearby. Dr. Wilson described the impact of these hog operations on communities living nearby. And he and Mr. Longus described the disproportionate impact of these operations on communities of color and low-wealth communities in the eastern part of the state. And then we heard from several community members who shared powerful comments about how this industry has impacted them, their friends, and their neighbors, and how that harm could get even worse with biogas. And unfortunately, for too long, DEQ has ignored this issue or not sufficiently addressed these concerns. And tonight, I implore the board to advise DEQ to put in place protections for communities and the environment as it develops a general permit for biogas. The time is now. This is an urgent issue, and I again thank the board for their attention to this important issue and ask that they provide a strong advisory statement to DEQ to address this environmental injustice. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Hildebrand. Up next, we have Kara Schultneck, followed by Lib Hutchby. Kara Schultneck, you have been unmuted.
Thank you. Good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to speak. My name is Kara Schultneck. I'm the Waccamaw River Keeper with Winyah Rivers Alliance, working to protect clean water in the Waccamaw River watershed in both North and South Carolina. Threats to clean water in my watershed are vastly different by state. While development is the greatest threat in South Carolina, CAFOs are the #1 threat to water quality in the North Carolina portion of the watershed. In the Waccamaw River watershed, we have mostly hog CAFOs, and we all live downstream of the CAFO. The top reaches of the watershed are dotted by the signature pink lagoons of CAFOs, which hold the hog waste. Pollution from CAFOs enter our watershed through runoff from spray fields and lagoons and through groundwater contamination, from the farms to the swamps to Lake Waccamaw and then into the Waccamaw River. These CAFOs produce a huge amount of waste, which introduce bacteria and nutrients into our waterways, leading to algal blooms, fish kills, and unclean and unsafe water. Biogas is not the solution for protecting clean water in North Carolina. It merely perpetuates a system that is flawed and dangerous to environmental and human health. The process relies on an outdated waste management system that involves storing and spraying the waste. Biogas will not end this practice. The waste is not being removed with the biogas, but only more concentrated. This will lead to even worse pollution problems. The network of pipelines needed to transport biogas will destroy wetlands, which provide important protections against flooding, as well as natural filtration for our rivers. Everyone has the right to clean water, and because of CAFOs, this cannot be guaranteed in the Waccamaw River. A large part of my job since Hurricane Florence and the resultant flooding has been defending North Carolina. But as I see more and more CAFOs coming on, and if biogas is allowed to take hold in North Carolina, the industry will continue to grow and pollute. And as we see more and more pollution, instead of singing praises and being proud of our clean, beautiful Black River water, I'll have to tell people that the river is no longer safe for fishing, swimming, and drinking. And that is my greatest fear as a river keeper and a citizen of the Carolinas.
Thank you. Up next, we have Lib Hutchby, followed by Edgar Miller. Hutchby, you've been unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, thank you. My name is Lib Hutchby. I am a member of the Triangle Branch of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. I'm also a founding member of 350 Triangle, a member of the NAACP of Carborough Chapel Hill, and I'm affiliated with the North Carolina Environmental Justice Network and the Haw River Assembly. I must admit that I was in tears a little bit ago when I heard Dr. Clayson say, "No soils in the country can hold all the nutrients." And they're calling the nutrients phosphorus that come from CAFOs. So please, hog farmers, understand, we're not trying to do away with farms. This is not, we're trying to encourage the DEQ to regulate waste and do waste management for existing hog farms and regulate poultry farm waste. Life is a gift. To be together here today is a gift. To breathe and have water is life. The access to clean water and sanitation is a human right. Because biogas maintains a filthy, destructive spray-fill system of waste management that poisons the air and water and degrades soil. And because biogas is really not a renewable energy, and because sacrifice zones exist in lower wealth Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, I'm asking yet again that the EJ and Equity Advisory Board make the following recommendations to the North Carolina Department of Environmental Quality.
Thank
1,
you, Ms. Hutchby. Your time has come to a close. If you could please email any additional comments to ej@ncdnr.gov. Thank you. Up next, we have Edgar Miller, followed by Anita Cunningham. Edgar Miller, you have been unmuted. Edgar Miller?
Yes, I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, you may begin.
Thank you, Renee. My name is Edgar Miller, and I'm the Yadkin River Keeper. And although this particular project is not in our watershed, I'm commenting tonight on the need for the state to begin taking environmental justice and equity issues seriously, particularly as it relates to assessing the cumulative impacts of permitting facilities in communities of color, where they're already experiencing a disproportionate environmental impact on health, on their public health and quality of life. In addition, the regulatory framework established for this project will have implications for future animal waste to energy projects and how the state will evaluate these cumulative impacts where these facilities are proposed, and that's particularly of concern to us in the Yadkin watershed, where we have at least one proposed facility on the table. And we're also concerned about the impact of the, as Kemp mentioned, exploding poultry industry in our watershed. And we certainly hope this process of assessing cumulative impacts will take that into account as well. I think many speakers have made points that I wanted to earlier, but just to emphasize one point about the legislation that established the general permit for these facilities. It basically says if DEQ does not approve the coverage under the general permit within 90 days of its submission, then the coverage is deemed improved. So why are we even here if the fix is already in for these facilities? And this just does not give DEQ the time to actually assess these cumulative impacts when they have that kind of arbitrary deadline imposed. We applaud the advisory boards holding this listening session tonight and hope you will encourage NCDEQ to not only increase public engagement in the regulatory and permitting process related to this facility, but also to go beyond just basic public participation and push for a full evaluation and consideration of the cumulative environmental impacts in these communities and support additional protections such as air and water quality monitoring. Thank you.
Thank you, Edgar Miller. Up next, we have Anita Cunningham, followed by Kathy Buckley. Anita Cunningham, you have been unmuted.
Hi, my name is Anita Cunningham. I'm the Program Director for the Robeson County Cooperative for Sustainable Development and a member of the Robeson County Unified Branch of the NAACP. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. I have a couple of points to make, and then I have some recommendations that I would like to be considered. First, I would like the EJ Advisory Board to evaluate why Smithfield Foods never changed its methods of hog waste, lagoon, and spray field treatment systems based on recommendations and a ban on the practice by the North Carolina legislature in 2007. Instead of changing its method, the factory farm gas industry is now expanding this system and causing further environmental and health risks to environmental justice communities and claiming and justifying this new practice as good for the climate. John Randall, British conservative and former environmental advisor to Margaret Thatcher, has called both biomass and biogas a fantasy solution to the climate crisis. Secondly, I also would like to ask that in this review that the EJ Advisory Board evaluate the literature critical of the biogas industry's claim that factory farm gas is a renewable source of energy, calling it renewable natural gas. When nothing is renewable when it is burned, and nothing is natural once it is removed from the ground or collected and stored in mass unnatural conditions that increase the harm to environment and public health. So I would like these two recommendations to be considered, that the DEQ Advisory Board recommends to Secretary Advisor that the DEQ take the position that the biogas industry should not be eligible to receive government benefits and incentives as a renewable energy source until final review of their permanent and adequate consumer feedback at a public hearing. And secondly, at the DEQ EJ Advisory Board recommend to Secretary Advisor for continued support of the ongoing moratorium of hog facility farms due to its lagoon and spray field treatment and waste management. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Anita Cunningham. Up next, we have Kathy Buckley, followed by Emily Keel. Kathy Buckley, you have been unmuted.
Kathy Buckley, staff for NC Apple, Alliance to Protect Our People and the Places We Live. How is, quote, renewable natural gas a boondoggle? Let us count as many ways as 2 minutes allow. First, removal of methane from the atmosphere earns renewable credits. Second, refining that methane to pipeline standard methane is counted again, or double counted, as renewable energy, earning more credits. Third, in a report to shareholders, Dominion Energy indicated that putting 4% quote renewable natural gas unquote in its pipelines would result in a 100% offset of its fossil gas, as methane is in 20 years, 25 times more climate polluting than carbon dioxide. You may understand the logic here. I do not. Fourth, methane derived from CAFO substitutes for sun and wind power that the utility no longer has to provide. Fifth, the utility will charge ratepayers for the cost plus a profit of this so-called but not really renewable power. And the cost is large. Estimates range from 5 to more than 17 times more expensive even than fossil gas, which is already more expensive than solar and wind. In summary, utility customers get to pay more for energy that is not clean. Already miserable living conditions are worsened, and less expensive solar and wind are forsaken. Please ask Secretary Advisor to uncover the fraud referred to by the utilities as, quote, renewable natural gas, unquote. Thank you.
Thank you, Kathy Buckley. Up next, we have Emily Keel, followed by Jeff Curry. Emily Keel, if you're here, if you could please raise your hand. I don't see Emily Keel, so we will move on to Jeff Curry, followed by Larry Baldwin. One moment while I find you. All right, Jeff Curry, you've been unmuted.
All right, thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight and for having this session. My name is Jeff Curry. and I'm an enrolled member of the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina and the Lumber River Keeper. My watershed is in southeastern North Carolina, and while not as concentrated as in Duplin and Sampson counties, our waterways and communities are also dealing daily with the onslaught of water and air pollution from hog CAFOs. Tonight, we're here because of the Smithfield Dominion-led biogas project on the Duplin-Sampson border. But as Smithfield has stated that it wants to harvest the methane from up to 90% of their corporate-owned finish operations. This is just the beginning. With over 40 finish operations with multiple containment buildings and waste lagoons in Scotland, Robinson, and Bladen counties in my watershed, I expect that our Lumber River tributaries and communities will shortly follow. Piedmont Natural Gas has an LNG plant in the Wakulla community of Robinson that can clean hog gas and can store it for future use. Smithfield has a ready-made partner to pollute our communities more. And when I say communities, my watershed is one of the poorest and most diverse racially and ethnically anywhere. What benefit will our federally designated wild and scenic Lumbee River and our historic and culturally strong communities get? None. As is increasingly the case, we are turning into a dumping ground, and with biogas, we are pawns in a corporate game of who can do the most harm while reaping the most profit. I ask this board to stand up for our air and water, our heavily impacted, economically neglected and ignored Black, Brown, and Indigenous communities, and push back. You've been appointed, recognized as leaders, and given a platform to keep an eye on things, to make sure there's real equity and justice for our inheritance of land, air, and water for our communities. And as my friend Jeff Ensid said, for our future 7 generations have a chance at a decent future as more than just our nation's hog lot. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeff Curry. Up next, we have Larry Baldwin, followed by Rebecca Drowan. Larry Baldwin, you have been unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir, you may begin.
Okay, thanks for the opportunity to speak. First of all, I put it very bluntly, this biogas plan is a lie. We're being fed false truths. This is nothing but a Band-Aid that's being applied to a system, this lagoon spray field system, to perpetuate its use. The capture of methane, sure, you might say that's a good thing. That's kind of like some renewable energy, but it's all the other problems that are stacked behind that. The continuation of the lagoon spray field system, the air emissions from those and from the hog barns themselves that are still impacting communities to this very day. This plan, this directed biogas plan, to me is one of the more disgusting plans the industry has come up with in recent years. And it is just, they're pulling the wool over our eyes. I think, or I hope that what this board has gathered from this tonight is information that will not be pulled over your eyes either. You know, we've heard some of the farmers, and again, we're not against the farmers. This whole issue here is not against the farmers. In fact, I think to some degree, the farmers may be being fed a line that is not true. The ones who are going to profit the most of this, from the most of this, is going to be the industry itself. The Smithfield Foods, WH Group, all these integrators at the very top who want to continually lay the burden on the backs of the people impacted and on our environment, our air, groundwater, surface water. It's time, please, board, advisory board, stand up. I know it's difficult sometimes to stand in the face of those who seem to have all the power, but we believe that you have more power than maybe even you realize. I know many of you on this board. I'm so glad that you've taken the time to do this tonight. Stand up, fight for the people of North Carolina. Thank you.
Thank you, Larry Baldwin. Up next, we have Rebecca Drohan, followed by Daisha Williams. Rebecca, you have been unmuted.
Okay, hi, and thank you for the opportunity to make comment tonight, and thank you from hearing from presenters and from community members. My name is Rebecca Drohan, and I'm with Coastal Carolina River Watch. We're a water quality advocacy organization serving the waterways of Carteret and Onslow counties. And I just want to echo much of what's already been said tonight, that biogas does nothing to improve the outdated lagoon and spray field systems in our watersheds. Instead, it can create incentives for this pollution and can actually worsen dangers from existing hog facilities. Biogas projects will perpetuate the water contamination, air pollution, and degraded quality of life in surrounding communities exposed to the Laguna and Sprayfield system. We've all been made aware that data shows that communities of color are disproportionately affected by this pollution, and little has been done to protect these communities from health impacts, mortality, and the ability to enjoy their home and environment. Cumulative impacts of biogas have to be evaluated in reference to all pollution impacts, including those of North Carolina's rapidly growing poultry industry, and comprehensive water quality monitoring provisions are also critical. Given that biogas is dependent on created emissions, it is not a renewable resource as compared to solar and wind, and those biogas transport pipelines pose significant environmental risks as well. And it's a time we need to be investing in a just and clean transition to clean energy and not promoting greenwashed platitudes. In addition, we need more inclusive measures towards transparency and community engagement, including adequate notice and community accessibility to information and permitting meetings. So I appreciate your concern for biogas issues and ask to uphold commitments to environmental justice and advise the DEQ on these matters and hold them accountable. Thank you.
Thank you, Rebecca Drowen. Up next is Daisha Williams, followed by Roy Lee Lindsay. Daisha Williams, you've been unmuted.
Hi, yeah, this is Deja Williams. I'm the Environmental Justice Manager for Clean Air NC. I first wanted to just thank the Environmental Justice and Equity Advisory Board for their continued commitment to environmental justice issues and for holding the session. Also, thank you to the presenters for giving that informative overview of the issues. Not to harp on what other people have said, but with respect to the general permit, as we can tell, there's a wide body of literature that has examined biodigestion and the emissions that result from its use in maximizing methane production, and not to mention as well all of the research that's been done around the impacts from CAFOs. And many of the experts in this field are here from North Carolina. So while today's listening session was a really great start, we hope that the advisory board will continue to address and build upon its knowledge on this subject and tap into the expertise that exists within our state. Because the fact of the matter is, as we heard from impacted communities, if this general permit is not issued properly, it can have serious consequences for those who are living closest to these facilities and are facing disproportionate impacts from the swine and poultry CAFOs. So given your role your advisory role to the DEQ secretary in addressing this kind of disproportionate impact, we urge the board to advise DEQ to include adequate monitoring and reporting requirements that will help to protect and equip surrounding communities against exposure. And the DEQ should also be advised to facilitate a process in which community members are made aware of and participate in decisions that will fundamentally affect their quality of life. And lastly, the DEQ should be reminded of its role in addressing and advancing environmental justice solutions. Thank you.
Thank you, Daisha Williams. Up next, we have Roy Lee Lindsay, followed by Christine Ellis.
Good evening. My name is Roy Lee Lindsay, and I'm the CEO of the North Carolina Pork Council. A couple of concerns during tonight's discussion that I heard involve odor and water quality impacts from hurricanes. Those are areas where our industry is continuing to improve, and the reality is that renewable natural gas projects have positive impacts in both of these areas. Go back and read the stories from the first farmers who installed covers on their lagoons. You'll see comment after comment praising these farmers for reducing odors. Covers also minimize the potential for a lagoon to overflow during a hurricane. Covers keep out rainwater, they keep lagoon levels lower, and they prevent flooding. Those are tangible benefits. Since this forum only allowed the board to hear from a small number of people in the local community, let me share with you the results of a survey we recently conducted. A few weeks ago, we surveyed 500 people in Sampson and Duplin County, and we asked them if they support RNG projects on hog farms. We found overwhelming support in both counties and across all demographics. Overall, the local communities support RNG projects by a 6-to-1 margin, and we think that's very significant. Lastly, I encourage the members of the board to closely examine the wing demographic study that was referenced here tonight. There is no question it was carefully crafted to achieve the exact results necessary to support the 2014 Title VI complaint. To dig deeper into claims of disproportionate impact, a professional statistics firm in Washington analyzed the exact same census data that Wing used. Their analysis showed, quote, the proportion of African Americans and people of color among the residents living near permitted hog farms is generally lower than the proportion of African Americans and people of color living farther away within the same geographic area. This is the opposite of discrimination, and it is consistent with DEQ's testimony that the current general permit does not discriminate, quote, on its face, in its implementation, by its impact, or in any other way, end quote. I hope you will recognize that we want to be good neighbors. We want our farms to continue to improve each and every day. We want to take steps to reduce odors, minimize potential for flooding, and protect our environment. RNG projects
Thank
achieve
you,
both
Roy.
those
Lee
goals.
Lindsay, your time has come to an end. If you have additional comments, please email those. Up next, we have Christine Ellis, followed by Dewey Botts. Christine Ellis, you've been unmuted.
Hello, good evening, everyone. My name is Christine Ellis, and I'm with Winyah Rivers Alliance. Over 20 years ago, a promise was made to the people and the waterways of Eastern North Carolina. It's well past the time for this board to push DEQ for actions that will protect impacted communities and protect our waterways. Ridding Eastern North Carolina of the antiquated lagoon and spray field system for hog waste management and replacing it with a cleaner, more sustainable technology is the promise. On behalf of Winyah Rivers Alliance and our river keepers, it's time to honor that promise to the people of Eastern North Carolina and to protect our waterways and our communities. Thank you.
Thank you, Christine Ellis. Up next, we have Dewey Botts, followed by Marvin Winstead. Dewey Botts, if you are on the call, if you could please press *3 or raise your hand if you are on the computer. Let's see if this call-in user. Hi, is this Dewey Botts?
Yes, you hear me now?
Yes, you may begin.
Yes. Yes, my name's Dewey Botts, and for what it's worth, I was raised on a dairy farm. First, I want to answer a question that keeps coming up. That suit that was settled between Easley and Smithfield had one word in it that sort of killed what everybody on here mostly wanted, and it was a word for technology that was economically feasible. So I need to say more. All of the technologies that have come up have been determined by subjectiveness of economically feasible. But I was state director of soil and water conservation with the department when these lagoons were put in, and we had to put them in to meet the federal standards which soil conservation had, and that was the lagoons. And first, I'd say I was very impressed with this board. You've got a real exceptional case of social injustice here, where all too often people of color and low income are the ones that are stuck with what we've got out here. And I want to mention, without forgetting it, that when I was there, the life expectancy of lagoons was 15 years. The other thing, not to forget that if this technology is put out there, that's only a small part, as people have said here. It doesn't address water quality, the other major issues that are there. And the mistake we made, government reacting again, was where we had a few hundred hogs. All of a sudden, we had 4 million. We didn't have 7 million people. And we've had probably over 4,000 of them out there, and they all went to the wrong place. Eastern North Carolina, where sandy soil, septic tanks, wells, rivers slow down and spread out. And there's just, not to mention the economic problem of tourism and fisheries for our state in that part of the country. Thanks so much for this opportunity.
Thank you, Dewey Botts. Up next, we have Marvin Winstead, followed by Nancy LaPlaza. Marvin Winstead, you've been unmuted. You may begin.
Thank you. I would like to thank the board for the opportunity to speak this evening. I am a resident of Nash County. I'm a farmer in Nash County. I grew up on this farm, lived here all my life. From 1959 until 1992, hogs were raised here on this farm, so I know what hog farming is. I know what the odors are about in concerning the raising of hogs. And for the people who are living involuntarily near these CAFOs in Duplin and Sampson County, I know what they're having to deal with, and I know some of the misinformation that's been stated tonight. If you visit the Dominion and Smithfield website about the Align RNG project, you will see lots of misinformation and disinformation about it. As others have said tonight, one of the things they're trying to do is greenwash and relabel renewable biogas as renewable natural gas. That's a complete misnomer. Something that you burn is not renewable. This has been said several times tonight. The highlights of their website say that they're spending $500 million to provide energy for 1,500 homes. Companies have not told everything to the public about this. As has been said earlier tonight by Ms. Buckley and others, if they can manage to inject 4% biogas into a pipeline, it gets classified as renewable, and the companies earn multiple increases in renewable energy credits. This is a shame and a travesty to the public. Companies have set this project up to receive money from the federal energy credit system, and it's something that should be exposed, and I hope the board will follow through on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Marvin Winstead. Up next, we have Nancy LaPlaza, followed by Chad Herring. Nancy, if you are dialed in, if you could please press *3. All right, I don't see Nancy LaPlaza. We will move on to Chad Herring. Chad Herring, you've been unmuted.
Good evening. My name is Chad Herring. I am a third-generation family farmer from Mount Olive. I serve as the Executive Director of North Carolina Farm Families, and we are proud to represent thousands of family farmers across the state. I would like to share our perspective on renewable natural gas projects and the valuable benefits they deliver to our communities. When I first heard that companies were planning to invest more than $500 million in renewable natural gas projects in North Carolina and elsewhere, I figured the only complaint was going to be about which communities benefited from these projects first. For years, we heard groups ask why pig farmers don't cover their lagoons. I can even remember a prominent Democrat legislator, Billy Richardson, publishing a letter in the Fayetteville Observer a few years ago. He wanted to require pig farmers to cover their lagoons. He called it the right thing to do. Doing so would give much needed relief to our environment as well as to the folks who live next to these operations, he said. Now, it feels like many groups are voicing opposition to these improvements, and frankly, I cannot understand why. We should view this investment as a positive step forward that will help our environment and better our communities. And we should support a permitting process that will allow these projects to move forward in a timely manner. In addition to reducing greenhouse gas emissions, RNG projects have many benefits for our communities. They help minimize odors, reduce the potential for flooding, and provide additional opportunities for farmers. We must remember that this is not a choice between generating renewable natural gas or getting rid of lagoons and spray fields. This is about how we can continue making improvements on our farms. Thank you for your time, and God bless.
Thank you, Chad Herring. Chad Herring was the last registered speaker that we had this evening, so I'll go back and see if any of the 4 that we missed that we had to pass on earlier are present. Again, if you are here, please press *3 if you've dialed in, or if you're on the computer, please raise your hand. That was Dr. Leonard Bull, Mr. Stephen Norris, Miss Margaret Carr, or Miss Emily Keel. And I don't see any of those individuals raising their hand. So Chairman Johnson, we have about 5 minutes if
Yes.
you want to open up for anyone who did not sign up to raise their hand.
I do. Thank you.
All right, if anyone has not signed up but would like to speak, please press *3 or raise your hand. Right, Chairman Johnson, it does not appear that anyone else has raised their hand indicating they would like to speak.
Thank you. Let's open it up for our board. If there are comments or questions in the next 2 to 3 minutes, we will entertain those from the board.
Mr. Chair, if no one else will speak up, I will, as usual.
Ms. Carter?
I move that this board, which is, I think, given great concern and comment to all of the comments that were made tonight, I move that we adopt the draft advisory letter that was prepared for your signature and the Madam Vice Chair's signature for the Secretary.
It's been moved by Ms. Carter that we adopt the draft letter prepared by Ms. White Williamson and Ms. Muhammad. Is there a second to that motion?
Mr. Chairman, this is Jeff Anstead. I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved and properly seconded. Is there discussion? Hearing none. I can't see because I just screwed up my computer, but hearing none. All in favor, let it be known by saying aye.
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 Aye. Opposed? The ayes have it. Any final thoughts from the board?
It's been a long night. I want to thank everyone in the public who came out and gave their 2 to 3 minutes to tell us on both sides of the issue how they felt. I appreciate them being publicly and civically engaged.
This is Naima. I would like to join Veronica in that thank you, especially to our community members and public that came out to show their support and state their concerns. And also our guest presenters, we really would like to thank them for taking the time to, number one, prepare their presentation, then show up and present them. We don't take that for granted, and we truly appreciate it.
Chairman Johnson, I do want to, add and join the members of the board in thanking everyone and very informative presentation in the whole spectrum from the exposure to the biology piece Dr. Wilson mentioned and the members of the community. I must encourage people who were not able to finish their comment to send their written comments. For example, a couple of recommendations that they were trying to make, but their time was up. So please do send your comments so that we can go through that. But thank you so much for being here, presenting, and sharing your views.
Absolutely.
Chair Johnson, this is, sorry, I know we're out of time. This is Jamie Cole. I just wanted to also thank all of the presenters, and I wanted to especially thank the people that live in these communities that spoke up. And I know it's not easy. We know it's not easy as a board. We understand you coming and speaking up, and either for yourself as a community member or for your friends and your colleagues. We know that that's not easy and it can be scary. So we do appreciate you taking that step and speaking up for so many others. So I just didn't want that to go unnoticed. And even though there are a lot of questions about what we as a board can do moving forward, just know, all of you, that we deeply appreciate this, as everyone's saying. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Ms. Cole.
I just very quickly just wanted to thank everyone, the presenters, the people that spoke. This is very important for us to do. You know, so often the community does not get a chance to share in this way and to give their perspective. And so I just want to thank to thank the community for pushing us to make this happen, and thank DEQ staff for helping us to make this happen, and tell the community to keep pushing us, keep holding us accountable. You know, this is a process, and we really appreciate your feedback and your partnership in this. Thank you so much.
Dr. Jim Johnson, I promise I'll be quick. This is Carolina. So I am a staff member at DEQ, and I also sit on the board. I just wanted to join this, the members, and just agree with them, because this has been a wonderful meeting to learn about the different sides of it and hearing directly from community members, especially folks that we've worked with before and new folks that, you know, we are just meeting now. I appreciate all of you coming on here and sharing that with us. I just wanted to make sure that I shared that as well. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Carolina. Others? I want to echo everything that has been said, but especially thank also our colleagues on the board, Sherry White Williams and Naima Muhammad, for holding us accountable and doing a great job of getting everybody here tonight. We're eternally grateful to our two leaders in this gathering and this listening session. We would be remiss if we didn't thank them for the outstanding job that they've done for also holding us accountable for the work that we should be doing. So Sherry and Naima, thank you very, very much. And let me thank all of you for taking time from your busy schedules to participate in this listening session this evening. I wish you all well, stay safe, and be on the lookout for materials for our upcoming board meeting. The work has just begun, so thank you all again, and have a good evening. Good night.
Thank you, Chairman Johnson. Everybody have a good night.
Thank you.
Chairman, do we need to officially adjourn?
Yeah, you can do that.
I move that we adjourn.
It's been moved, and I'll second it, so nobody else has to. Consider us adjourned.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.